The first sound was a single blast that split the night wide open. Then another and another, in a neighborhood where the loudest thing after midnight was usually a dog barking. The noise shook people from their beds. Lights flicked on one by one. Curtains pulled back. Neighbors frozen in place, waiting, listening. Something terrible had just happened, and everyone knew it. Calls to 911 poured in within minutes. Patrol cars tore down the quiet street. Sirens cutting through the dark, their lights bouncing off brick walls and manicured lawns. Officers stepped out, hands hovering near their holsters, their radios alive with static. The air was heavy, too heavy for a place that usually felt safe. Inside that house, behind a door that looked no different from any other, lay the kind of truth no one in this town would ever forget. What the officers walked into would scar them and leave the community asking one question no one was ready to answer. How could everything a family built end this way in a single night? Welcome to Crime Final Chapter. Thanks for your support. Dive into the darkest crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe. Daryl Knox was the kind of man people nodded to when they saw him in town. At 42 years old, he wore his uniform with a straight back and a serious face. A correctional officer who had spent more than 15 years working shifts in Alabama's toughest facilities. To his neighbors in Montgomery, he looked like the steady type, the man who kept things under control no matter how bad the world outside got. He was the one people thought of as dependable, a man with discipline in his bones. But that badge on his chest, the one that earned him respect, hid a life that was far from the picture-perfect image everyone else thought they saw. At home, things looked just as solid on the surface. His wife, Chenise, 39 years old, worked as a nurse at a local clinic. She had the kind of reputation that drew people to her. Kind-hearted, hardworking, the one who checked on elderly neighbors when no one else bothered. Their children carried that same brightness. 14-year-old Kayla was the kind of teenager who still laughed with her mom in the kitchen, even as she started pulling away into her own world of high school friends. 10-year-old Devin was full of energy, always running to the yard with a basketball under his arm, the kind of kid people said would grow into something great. Together, the Knox family looked like stability. They lived in a modest two-story house where birthdays were celebrated with balloons on the porch, and summer nights ended with the sound of kids playing tag in the yard. The neighbors often said they wished their homes felt as balanced as the Knox household appeared to be. On the outside, everything looked steady. But behind that front door, Daryl carried something heavier than most could imagine. Daryl's coworkers knew him as strict but fair, a man who clocked in and did his job without complaint. Yet, those same coworkers also noticed how his eyes lit up every time a work trip came up that brought him near Nevada. It wasn't just the desert sun pulling him there. It was the neon lights of Las Vegas. Long before July 2017, Daryl had been making trips west, slipping away for weekends where his badge meant nothing, and the casino tables made him feel alive in a way his daily grind never could. That attraction to gambling started out small, but like a spark catching dry wood, it never really went out. He told Chenise those trips were about conferences or professional training, but the truth was he couldn't shake the pull of the casino floor. In 2014, Daryl Knox walked into a Las Vegas casino for the very first time, as if he'd been waiting for that moment his whole life. The noise was overwhelming, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the steady clink of chips moving across tables. Neon lights stretched across the ceilings, and voices rose with shouts of victory and groans of loss. He wasn't supposed to be there long. It was a quick stop on a work-related trip, a chance to step inside and see what everyone always talked about. But that night would change everything. Sitting at a row of machines, Daryl fed in a few bills, pressing buttons without much thought, when suddenly the lights above him went wild. Bells chimed, numbers flashed, and people turned to look. He had just hit a $25,000 jackpot. $25,000 in one pull. The kind of win that makes a man feel untouchable. From that moment, Daryl believed he had found his way out of an ordinary life. A correctional officer's salary was steady, but never spectacular. The bills stacked up. The mortgage crept forward every month, and Chenise's nursing checks mostly went to the same routine: groceries, tuition, car payments. But in that one instant, Daryl saw an alternative future. One where he wasn't just grinding day in and day out. He was convinced luck had picked him, and luck in his mind would keep on showing up. After that first jackpot, his trips to Las Vegas weren't just about curiosity anymore. They became missions. By 2015, he was telling himself he needed just one more win to double what he had to flip money into security. He started carving out pieces of every paycheck. At first, it was small, maybe 200 here, 300 there. He tucked it aside, waiting for the right weekend to disappear under the glow of casino lights. Each trip was filled with the same ritual. He walked in believing he would leave with more than he came with. And sometimes he did. Small wins here and there. $1,000 on a blackjack table. Maybe a few hundred from the slots. Those little victories kept him hooked, convincing him he was only one game away from another $25,000 miracle. But the wins never lasted. The losses crept in slowly at first, then harder. By 2016, the pattern was clear. Daryl was setting aside money for what he called the big win, but he was leaving casinos emptier each time. Chenise started asking about missing money in their joint account. He was smooth with his answers, telling her that overtime checks had been delayed or payroll at the prison had made mistakes. He'd look her in the eye and tell her not to worry, that everything was covered. She believed him because on the surface, Daryl was still a man with a steady job, the uniform, the father who showed up to basketball games and family dinners. What Chenise couldn't see were the unpaid bills shoved at the back of the drawer, the late notices hidden under piles of paperwork. By the fall of 2016, those subtle cracks had started to show. Daryl's mood shifted like a storm rolling in without warning. Some nights he was calm, even cheerful, convinced his next trip would solve everything. Other nights he snapped over small things, raising his voice when Chenise questioned a charge on the bank statement or when Kayla asked why they couldn't buy something simple for school. That tension wrapped itself around the family like an invisible weight. Still, Chenise wanted to believe him. After all, he was her husband. They had built a life together. Trust was supposed to mean believing his words, even when her gut told her something was off. Let me ask you right here. If your spouse kept disappearing with your savings, would you question it? Or would you trust them? Believing love means giving them the benefit of the doubt? Drop your answer in the comments, because for Chenise, those choices will become everything. It started with the numbers not adding up, and Chenise knew something wasn't right. By early 2017, the joint account that she carefully monitored began draining in ways she couldn't explain. The balance that should have covered school fees for Kayla and Devin suddenly dipped so low that she had to scramble just to make partial payments. Bills that were always handled on time now came with red stamps warning of deadlines. Chenise was the type who kept receipts, who tracked what went in and out, and no matter how many times she added and redid the figures, they simply didn't make sense. She wasn't careless, and she wasn't imagining it. Money that should have been there was gone, and the missing amounts weren't small slips. They were chunks that changed the way the family lived. At first, she asked Daryl lightly, as if maybe she had overlooked something. "Did you move money into another account? Did you cover something I didn't know about?" She wanted to believe there was an answer that would ease her nerves. Daryl didn't flinch. He told her parole had been late, that overtime he had worked wasn't processed yet, that the state was cutting back checks and everything would balance soon. His tone was calm enough to make her doubt herself for a moment, but the pit in her stomach didn't go away. By March, Kayla's school called, reminding Chenise that tuition hadn't been covered in full. That never happened before. Devin's basketball program asked again about overdue fees. These weren't luxuries. They were basics. Things Chenise prided herself on keeping secure for her children. She pressed Daryl harder. Each time, the excuses came quicker. He said the prison payroll system had errors or that money had been withheld for insurance adjustments. He brushed her off with confidence, as if the lies were easier to say than the truth he didn't want to face. Inside their house, the air grew heavier with every confrontation. Behind closed doors, the fights turned sharp. Chenise wasn't loud by nature, but her voice carried when frustration boiled over. She wanted to know why she was the only one panicking about bills. Daryl responded with distance. Sometimes he ignored her questions altogether, sinking into the couch with the television on, eyes blank. Other times he snapped back with irritation, accusing her of not trusting him, of nagging, of making small issues bigger than they were. The warmth between them that once filled their evenings began to fade, replaced by silence that stretched long into the night. Neighbors still saw the perfect family on the outside. Daryl mowing the lawn, Chenise waving politely, the kids playing, but inside the walls, cracks widened with every passing week. Chenise didn't keep her worries locked away entirely. By April, she confided in a close friend, telling her that Daryl just wasn't himself anymore. She said he seemed lost in thought, his mood shifting like a switch she couldn't control. Sometimes he was overly calm, other times quick-tempered, but never like the steady man she had married. She admitted she didn't recognize him, that she felt like he was slipping into a world she couldn't reach. Friends urged her to stay strong, to keep watching, to protect her children if things grew worse. Chenise, though, was torn. She loved her husband, but the lies stacking on top of each other made her question if she even knew who he really was anymore. Viewers, let me stop here and ask you, if you were in Chenise's place, watching the account drain, hearing the same excuses over and over, would you accept those answers? Or would you push harder, risking the peace in your home to get the truth? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is where choices define everything. By the summer of 2017, the tension was impossible to hide. Daryl avoided eye contact at dinner, eating quickly and retreating to the bedroom. Chenise picked at her food, her mind spinning with unanswered questions. Kayla and Devin noticed, too. They asked why their parents argued more, why the house didn't feel the same. The children couldn't name it, but they felt it. The distance, the way laughter no longer came as easily, the way Daryl carried himself like he was buried under something too heavy to share. The Knox household, once the picture of stability, now felt like a stage play where the actors no longer believed in their lines. Every day pulled Chenise further from the man she thought she knew, and every lie Daryl told dug him deeper into a corner he wouldn't escape. June 30th, 2017 was the day Daryl Knox crossed a line he could never walk back from. He walked into the bank with his head high, convincing himself he was doing something smart, something that would fix everything once and for all. He told Chenise the money was for a debt consolidation plan, a way to combine what they owed and start fresh. He looked her straight in the eye when he said it, his voice steady enough to hide the storm inside. In reality, he was emptying out every dollar they had saved as a family, $78,000, the sum of years of work, sacrifice, and discipline. That money represented their future, the children's college, the stability of their home, the cushion against hard times. Daryl told himself this was a temporary risk, that in just a few days he'd come back with more than he left with. He drove west alone, his mind fixated on the memory of that jackpot from 3 years earlier, convinced lightning could strike again. The moment he hit the Vegas Strip, it was like stepping into another universe, a place designed to drown out reality and replace it with endless temptation. Bright lights spilled down from towering billboards, each one screaming promises of wealth and luxury. Neon signs painted the night sky in red, gold, and green, flickering like they were alive. The steady hum of thousands of voices rolled through the streets, a mixture of cheers, laughter, and sighs, pulling Daryl deeper into the madness. The casinos stretched out in front of him like palaces, each one daring him to walk in. They pulled at him like magnets, whispering that fortune was waiting behind every door. The air hit him as soon as he stepped across the red carpeted floors, thick with smoke, heavy with perfume, and spiked with the bitter smell of spilled liquor. The rows of slot machines blinked like sirens, their flashing screens calling to him, their sounds piercing into his mind. To Daryl, this wasn't just another trip. In his mind, this was the big one. This was a trip that would erase every late bill, silence Chenise's questions, and cover the cracks spreading in his marriage. He believed, with the kind of certainty only desperation can bring, that one more win would save him. The first night seemed to prove him right. He slid chips across the green felt of a blackjack table, his heart pounding with every card turned over. His palms sweated as the dealer's hands moved quick and sure. When he won small hands, the rush coursed through him like fire. When he pulled in a $1,000 hand, He felt invincible. He told himself this was it, the jackpot waiting to happen. Every small win fed that lie, convincing him that the next table, the next hand, the next spin would be the one that changed everything. For a few hours, he was flying. But Las Vegas doesn't let men like Daryl fly for long. By the second night, the shine began to fade. The chips slid away faster than they came. He poured money into machines, each one swallowing his cash with blinking promises and delivering nothing in return. He hopped from blackjack to roulette, from poker to baccarat, desperate for something, anything that would swing his way. The drinks lined up on the bar didn't help. Each swallow of whiskey blurred the edges, each new glass making him reckless. The wind slowed, then stopped, and the losses stacked higher. His heart no longer raced with adrenaline. It pounded with dread. He told himself he couldn't walk away now. He had to push through. He had to fight back. By July 3rd, 3 days into the trip, reality was closing in. The $78,000 that Chenise believed was locked away for their future had vanished into the pockets of the casinos. Every cent of their family's savings was gone, and Daryl knew deep down it wasn't coming back. Still, he couldn't stop. He pulled out his credit cards, already stretched to their limits, and began taking cash advances. He walked from ATM to ATM, withdrawing money he didn't have, each transaction digging him deeper into the pit. The machines beeped and whirred, coins clattered, cards shuffled, and he drifted between it all like a man possessed. His face grew more hollow, his eyes more desperate. Viewers, stop and think. If you lost everything in 3 days, would you have walked away? Or would that hunger for one more chance have pulled you deeper? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is a turning point where Daryl lost control of himself completely. By the 5th night, July 5th, the facade collapsed. Daryl was broke in every way that mattered. He sat slumped in a hotel room that smelled of liquor and failure, the curtains drawn to shut out the cool glow of the strip. Neon still slipped in around the edges, staining the walls with colors that mocked him. Empty bottles cluttered the table, betting slips lay crumpled on the floor, and the silence pressed down on him harder than any prison cell could. He stared at his reflection in the blank television screen. But the man looking back wasn't the man who left Montgomery just days before. His uniform back home carried authority. His family carried love. But now he saw only emptiness. That was the moment he started realizing his life was completely, I just want to say, not damaged, not bruised, destroyed. He had crossed a line there was no coming back from. The savings were gone. The debt was climbing. The lie he had been telling himself that luck would save him was shattered. Chenise would want answers, and the children would see the truth. He couldn't bear it. The shame was so thick it clawed at his throat. He broke down in that room, head in his hands, body shaking, the weight of it crushing him from inside. And yet in that spiral, he reached for another lie. He picked up the phone and called Chenise, his voice heavy with rehearsed calm. He told her the funds weren't gone. They were tied up in an investment. He said they couldn't touch the money yet, but it would pay off soon. He layered the lie with enough fake confidence to buy himself time, even though his voice cracked when she pressed for details. Chenise wanted to believe him. She had to, but something in the way he spoke left her unsettled. She knew something wasn't right, but she couldn't yet see the scale of it. Back in Montgomery, the unraveling was already obvious to those around him. When Daryl returned to work, he wasn't the same officer. The usual discipline was gone. His eyes darted around rooms. His shoulders twitched with paranoia, and he snapped at inmates over the smallest provocations. He barked at coworkers, lost his temper without warning, and paced through his shifts like a man waiting for the walls to close in. The paranoia set in deep, chewing away at him from inside. Every look from a coworker felt like suspicion. Every question from Chenise felt like exposure. He wasn't just hiding a gambling loss anymore. He was hiding the destruction of his entire family's future. And with every lie, every uneasy glance, the pressure on his shoulders grew heavier, pressing him toward the breaking point. By mid-July 2017, the tension in the Knox household was thick enough that everyone in the family could feel it, even the children. Chenise had reached her breaking point. She couldn't ignore the bills piling up on the kitchen counter anymore. The mortgage payment had slipped into the late column, something she never allowed before, and every reminder in the mail was another red flag. The kids were asking why certain things weren't being paid on time, and she didn't know how to answer them without exposing the cracks that were widening behind closed doors. One night, after balancing the numbers over and over, Chenise confronted Daryl with a firmness that left no room for excuses. She asked directly where the money had gone. She wanted to know why their future was suddenly crumbling after years of discipline and saving. Daryl's response was quick, almost too quick. He snapped back with more talk about payroll errors, about state delays, about technical glitches, but his eyes gave him away. They darted from her face to floor, and his voice carried an edge that made the lie obvious. Chenise didn't believe him anymore, and he could feel her doubt pressing against him like a wall he couldn't break through. From that moment, Daryl felt cornered. Each day that passed only deepened his sense of shame. He carried the weight of $78,000 loss in the casinos, and the truth gnawed at him every time he walked through the door. He saw it in Chenise's silence, in Kayla's questions about why school supplies hadn't been ordered yet, in Devin's confusion about why they couldn't sign up for basketball on time. The family that once looked at him as their protector now seemed to stare at him with suspicion, and it tore at him in ways he couldn't admit. That shame twisted into rage. He lashed out at small things, slamming a door too hard, snapping at Chenise for asking questions he couldn't answer, raising his voice when the children asked for something simple. The man who once carried himself with calm control now looked like he was unraveling. At work, the same cracks showed. Co-workers whispered about how distracted he seemed, how quick his temper flared with inmates. They saw the sweat on his forehead, even in air-conditioned rooms, the way his hands shook slightly when he signed reports. Daryl wasn't just dealing with money problems anymore. He was spiraling mentally, convinced the truth was about to explode and destroy him completely. At night, the house grew colder. Daryl would sit alone in the living room, a bottle of whiskey half empty on the table, his badge glinting in the low light. Sometimes he placed his service weapon beside it, staring at both as if they held answers he couldn't reach. Hours would pass with him locked in silence, replaying lies in his head, trying to figure out how much longer he could keep the truth from slipping out. Chenise, lying in bed, listened to the creak of the chairs he shifted, the clink of glass against the table, and she knew he was lost in a battle she couldn't pull him out of. The paranoia consumed him. He was sure Chenise would leave once she discovered the full truth. He imagined her packing up the kids, telling him she could no longer trust a man she married. That thought haunted him more terrifying than the loss of money itself. To Daryl, the collapse of his image as a husband, father, and provider was unbearable. Every lie made him feel weaker. Every overdue bill made him feel smaller. He told himself there were only two paths left. He could confess and face the humiliation of admitting he had gambled away their future, or he could do something far darker, something final that would silence the voices questioning him forever. Viewers, think about this moment. At this point, Daryl had two options: confess and face humiliation, or silence the very people who loved him most. What do you think he should have done? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this was the crossroads where a man's shame turned into something deadly. July 15th, 2017 began like any other Saturday in the Knox household. And maybe that was the strangest part of all. The evening looked normal enough from the outside. Chenise moved through the kitchen with quiet efficiency, setting plates on the table, the smell of fried chicken and collard greens filling the air. Kayla sat nearby, her head bent over her homework, scribbling in her notebook while tapping her pencil against the edge of the paper. Devin, restless and always looking for an extra bite, tried sneaking a second helping of dessert before dinner, laughing when his mom caught him. Chenise shook her head with a tired smile, her phone never far from reach, the glowing screen reminding her of bills she couldn't quite reconcile. Her brow furrowed every few minutes as she scrolled through overdue notices. Across the table, Daryl sat quietly, barely eating, his fork moving food around his plate without much interest. His eyes seemed distant, fixed on nothing, his silence heavy enough that even the children noticed. The family talked, but Daryl's mind was somewhere else, spinning on secrets only he carried. As night settled in and the clock ticked later, The children went through their familiar bedtime routines. Kayla brushed her teeth, pulling her hair into a loose bun before sliding under the covers with her journal nearby. Devin dragged his stuffed basketball pillow into bed, his small body stretching across the sheets as he clutched it tight. Chenise moved around the bedroom, folding laundry, setting clothes out for church the next morning, tried to keep order in a home that already felt off balance. Daryl stayed behind in the kitchen, the dim light casting shadows across his face. A half-empty glass of whiskey sat in front of him, condensation dripping down the sides as he poured himself another. His eyes locked on the table, but his mind was racing. Every bill, every overdue notice, every lie he had told Chenise echoed in his head like a hammer. By the time the clock neared midnight, the silence inside the Knox house felt unnatural, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The children were tucked into their rooms, the weight of sleep pulling them deeper into dreams, their innocence untouched by the storm about to break. Chenise had already settled into bed, curled beneath the blanket, her breathing even and calm. But Daryl remained in the kitchen, his elbows on the table, the half-empty glass of whiskey beside him untouched for minutes now. His mind was a battlefield, every thought colliding, every lie he told echoing louder in the quiet. Slowly, he pushed back on the table, the chair scraping against the floor, a sound so sharp it almost startled him. Each step he took toward the drawer where his service weapon rested carried the heaviness of finality. He opened it, reached inside, and pulled out the gun. For a long moment, he simply stared at it, his hand trembling, his jaw tight. He slid the magazine in with deliberate precision, each click cutting into the silence like a hammer. His chest rose and fell in uneven bursts, his breathing rough, as though his own body was fighting against him. It was as if he was rehearsing the act inside his head, knowing that once he started, there would be no way back. The house was dark, except for the dim glow of the bathroom nightlight. He moved down the hallway, each step dragging the weight of what he was about to do. He pushed the bedroom door open slowly, the hinges barely making a sound, his shadow spilling across the carpet. Chenise lay still, her face softened in sleep, her body turned slightly toward the side of the bed. For a split second, he faltered. His finger hovered on the trigger, his chest pounding like a drum. The memory of their years together flashed in his head. The wedding day, the children's births, the laughter they once shared. But shame and fear outweighed love in that instant, and the shot rang out. The blast was deafening in the small room, reverberating off the walls. Chenise never opened her eyes. Her life ended instantly, the blanket around her still pulled tight. The gun lowered for a breath before another sound pulled him forward. Kayla had stirred the noise, her body shifting under the covers. A muffled cry slipped from her lips, the fragile sound of confusion breaking the silence. Daryl's feet felt heavier now as he turned toward her room, the darkness of the hallway stretching longer with every step. He pushed the door open, and the faint glow from the window lit her face. She sat up, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief, her teenage innocence colliding with the horror before her. Daryl raised the gun again. Before she could speak, before she could scream, he pulled the trigger. The shot tore through the room, the echo ringing in his ears. Her body collapsed backward onto the sheets, her journal slipping from her hand and sliding onto the floor. The sound jolted Devin awake. His small footsteps pounded into the hallway, his arms clutching his pillow as he rushed forward in panic. His wide eyes caught the image of his father holding the gun, his young mind struggling to understand. There was a flicker of recognition, a split second of disbelief before the truth became too clear. Daryl didn't stop. He aimed at his son and fired at close range. The shot was final, the force dropping Devin instantly. The hallway that had so often echoed with laughter and running feet was now drowned in a silence heavier than anything it had ever carried. 3 lives gone in the span of minutes. A wife, a daughter, a son, a family destroyed in the place where they should have been safest, betrayed by the man who was meant to protect them. Daryl turned away from the devastation and walked back toward the living room. The weapon was still in his hand, its weight almost fusing with his own body. He sank into the armchair, his posture rigid, his eyes glassy and hollow. The bottle of whiskey still sat on the table waiting for him. He poured another glass, his movements mechanical, as though he were acting out a script he no longer controlled. He drank slowly, the liquid burning his throat, but he barely flinched. The gun lay across his lap, heavy and final, as if daring him to make one more choice. He didn't pace. He didn't run. He didn't even cry. He sat motionless, staring into the dark void of the room, waiting for the sirens he knew were already on their way. The first 911 call came in at exactly 12:07 a.m. on July 16, 2017. A neighbor's voice shook as she told the dispatcher she had heard gunfire, not once, but several times in quick succession. Within minutes, other calls followed, each one describing the same sharp cracks that broke through the stillness of the subdivision. This wasn't fireworks or a car backfiring. Everyone knew the difference. The neighborhood was a kind where night stayed calm, the only sound usually being the chirp of crickets or the hum of an air conditioner. Gunshots in this part of Montgomery were so out of place that no one who heard them hesitated to reach for the phone. Dispatchers moved quickly, sending patrol cars racing toward a quiet street, their sirens piercing the night as they cut through the darkened blocks. By the time officers pulled into the subdivision, the entire neighborhood was awake. Porch lights flickered on up and down the road. Curtains shifted as people peeked out, but dared not come closer. Fear hung over the homes like a heavy cloud. Neighbors whispered from their doorways, but kept their distance, not knowing what or who waited inside the Knox house. The police cruiser stopped in front of the two-story home, headlights shining on the driveway. The officers stepped out cautiously, hands hovering near their holsters, every sense alert. The 911 reports had been too consistent to ignore, and the silence now pressing down on the block made it worse. No voices came from the house, no movement behind the blinds, just the eerie stillness of a place that should have been alive with the noise of a family. The officers approached the front door slowly, their radios buzzing with clipped instructions. One reached out, expecting resistance, but the knob turned easily. The door swung open without a sound. Inside, the air was heavy, the smell of alcohol mixing with something they couldn't quite place yet. Their flashlights cut through the dark living room, and that's when they saw him. Daryl Knox sat in an armchair, his posture stiff, his face pale. On the coffee table in front of him lay his service weapon, the same gun neighbors had heard in the night. Next to it was a bottle of whiskey, uncapped, the liquid inside almost gone. He didn't flinch at the sight of the officers. He didn't reach for the weapon or try to run. He just sat there motionless, staring past them as if he'd already accepted whatever came next. The officers moved in quickly, one keeping his weapon drawn, while the others secured the room. They ordered him to stand, to move his hands where they could see them, and Daryl obeyed without a word. His eyes stayed low, his body slumped, but he did not fight. Behind them, other officers began clearing the rest of the house. The silence didn't last. Within seconds, voices crackled over radios, strained and horrified. Chenise was found in the master bedroom, lying still beneath the blanket, the wound leaving no question of what had happened. Kayla's body was discovered in her room, her journal fallen to the floor beside her bed, a heartbreaking reminder of how young she was. Devin was in the hallway, his small frame collapsed where he had tried to run. The scenes were devastating, and what struck the officers most was how there were no signs of a struggle. No overturned furniture, no broken glass, no fight for survival. These weren't random killings. They were execution-style, deliberate, carried out by someone the family had trusted completely. The weight of that realization pressed down on everyone inside the house. The officers returned to Daryl, placing him in handcuffs, the clink of metal echoing louder than anything else in the room. One asked him directly why. Why would he do this? Daryl's answer was barely audible, his voice cracked and broken, but the words chilled him to their core. He muttered, "I couldn't let them see me as a failure." He didn't look up when he said it. He didn't plead for mercy or offer excuses. He stared at the floor, his shoulders sagging as if the admission itself was heavier than the handcuffs around his wrists. Outside, the flashing red and blue lights painted the street, neighbors clustering in small groups as whispers spread through the crowd. They knew something unthinkable had happened, but the full picture hadn't reached them yet. Parents pulled their children closer, shaking their heads, asking how something like this could happen to a family everyone thought was solid. The image of Daryl being let out of the house in cuffs would stay with them forever, a shocking contrast to the man they had once nodded to in passing, the man in uniform who was supposed to represent order and control. Viewers, let me ask you, can shame really push someone to destroy everything they ever built, including the very people who love them most? Was it pride, fear, or something darker that made Daryl choose silence over confession? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this question is one that lingers long after the sirens fade and the crime scene tape goes up. The crime scene team moved through the Knox home with careful precision, every step documented, every angle photographed. What immediately stood out to investigators was the lack of disruption. Nothing in the house had been touched except for the family themselves. Furniture was undisturbed, valuables remained untouched, and doors and windows showed no sign of being forced open. That detail alone told detectives the truth no one wanted to say out loud. The killer had been someone who belonged there. When the ballistics reports came back, they confirmed what the officers already suspected. The bullets matched Daryl's service weapon, the same gun he laid on the coffee table when police walked in. There was no mystery intruder, no shadowy figure slipping through the night. The man of the house, the husband and father, had turned that weapon on his own family. From there, investigators dug into the question that still hung over everyone. Why? Detectives began with the financial trail, combing through bank records to piece together the days and weeks before July 15th, 2017. It didn't take long for red flags to emerge. Withdrawal after withdrawal appeared in Las Vegas, Nevada during the first week of July, each transaction draining thousands from the Knox family's account. Receipts from ATMs inside casinos painted a picture of desperation. Surveillance footage confirmed it beyond any doubt. There on the screen was Daryl captured by cameras at slot machines, poker tables, and blackjack games. His face tense, his body language jittery as he threw money across the felt tables. The amounts were staggering. Tens of thousands spent in mere days. Every dollar of the $78,000 that Chenise had thought was locked away for their family's future. Detectives sat back and looked at the numbers. By July 5th, the account was empty, completely drained. From there, the spiral only deepened. Investigators pulled his credit reports, and what they found painted a devastating picture. Nearly every car was maxed out. Cash advances were recorded from multiple lenders, the interest compounding by the day. Letters of foreclosure had already been sent regarding their home. Deadlines looming just weeks away. Daryl had been drowning financially long before that night, and the gambling trip had only sealed his fate. When Chenise's sister was interviewed, her words cut through the file with heartbreaking clarity. She admitted she had suspected Daryl was gambling, but she had no idea it had reached this level. She remembered Chenise hinting about missing money, about arguments that didn't make sense, but no one in the family could have imagined it was this catastrophic. She told detectives she thought Chenise believed Daryl had some bad habits, maybe small lies, but nothing that could ruin their entire life savings. Hearing how deep it went left her stunned, her voice breaking as she described her sister's trust in a man who had hidden everything from her. As the evidence piled up, detectives realized the motive wasn't mystery at all. It was humiliation, shame, and fear of being exposed. Daryl had gambled away everything, and when the walls closed in, instead of confessing, he chose to silence the people he feared would see him for what he was. For investigators, the case was airtight. They had the weapon, they had the financial proof, they had the casino footage, and they had the heartbreaking testimony from Chenise's sister, confirming suspicions that had never been voiced loudly enough to stop what was coming. What remained was the chilling reality that none of this had to happen. Daryl had options. He could have told the truth, admitted the losses, sought help. Instead, he chose a path that ended with 3 lives gone and a community shattered. And as detectives boxed up the evidence, one thought lingered. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was a collapse of an entire family documented not just in blood and photographs, but in bank statements, foreclosure notices, and casino footage that showed exactly how far one man was willing to go to chase the illusion of a win. The courthouse was packed the morning Daryl Knox appeared before the judge, and from the moment he was led and wearing shackles, every eye followed him. It wasn't the same man neighbors once waved to in uniform. He looked smaller now, hunched forward, his face drawn tight, his eyes fixed on the floor. By October 2017, prosecutors had gathered every piece of evidence they needed. They had the weapon, they had the casino footage, they had the financial trail, and they had Daryl's own muttered confession at the scene. The state was ready to pursue the death penalty, and everyone knew it. But Daryl's lawyers advised him there was no point in dragging the case through a long trial. The evidence was crushing, and his own words had already sealed his fate. On October 19th, 2017, Daryl Knox entered a guilty plea in exchange for avoiding a death sentence. The courtroom was silent as the plea was read, even though the outcome was expected. Hearing him admit to killing Chenise Taylor and Devin made the air in the room feel heavier. He didn't raise his head. He didn't try to explain. The plea wasn't about remorse. It was about survival. When the prosecutor stood to address the court, their words cut through the silence with a weight that left no doubt about what had happened. They said plainly, this wasn't a moment of insanity. This was a choice. They reminded the court that Daryl had planned his actions, loaded his weapon, and walked into each room with intent. It wasn't a split-second snap or an accident born of rage. It was deliberate, carried out with calm precision. The prosecutor's voice rose as they told the jury, the judge, and everyone present that this was one of the most cold-blooded family murders Montgomery had ever seen. The judge listened, his expression hard as stone. Then it was Chenise's family's turn to speak. Her sister stepped forward first, her voice shaking as she looked directly at Daryl. She talked about Chenise's kindness, about the way she cared for everyone else before herself, and how she deserved so much more than to die in her sleep at the hands of the man she trusted. She said her sister had given her life to building a home for her children, only to have that life ripped away in minutes. Then Kayla and Devin's uncle spoke, his words breaking as he described what those children had meant to family. He said Kayla was just beginning to dream about high school, about college, and Devin was the boy who brought joy to every family gathering. He said their futures had been stolen, not by strangers, but by the father who should protected them. The pain in his voice filled the room, and even the court staff lowered their eyes. Another family member, holding back tears, turned to Daryl and asked, "How could you look him in the eye and still pull the trigger?" The question hung in the air unanswered as Daryl sat motionless, still refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Viewers, let me ask you, what would you say to a man who destroyed his own family? Would words even be enough? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is where justice and grief meet heathen. When it came time for sentencing, the judge's words were sharp. He called the murders calculated, deliberate, and unforgivable. He reminded Daryl that every family in the city looked at him as a protector, a correctional officer sworn to uphold the law. And instead, he became the greatest danger to those who trusted him most. Then the sentence was handed down. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. No freedom. No chance to walk the streets again. Daryl Knox was let out of the courtroom the same way he entered, shackles clinking with each step. Chenise's family sat in the gallery, their faces wet with tears, but there was no sense of victory. Justice had been served, but it didn't bring back Chenise, Kayla, or Devin. It didn't erase the nightmares or the empty chairs at family dinners. It only closed the door on one chapter of story that would haunt them forever. And that's the story of how a man trusted with a badge chose shame over honesty and left 3 lives behind in silence. Cases like this force us to ask hard questions. How much can hidden secrets and unspoken pain destroy a family? Could this tragedy have been stopped if Daryl had told the truth before it was too late? Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe gambling addiction should be treated as a disease or punished as a crime? And if Chenise had uncovered the truth sooner, what do you think she should have done? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading them. And one more thing, where are you watching from? Tell us your city or country below, and join the Crime Final Chapter community. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into the darkest crimes, and turn on the bell so you never miss the next case. Because here we don't just tell stories, we reveal them.